Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Retuning Your Firm. This is Richard Chaplin from the Managing Partners Forum, and I'm absolutely delighted to be your host for today's show. So what are we going to be talking about? First of all, let's just think about what are we doing here. We're retuning your firm. We're thinking about all the things that every management team should be focused on in trying to make sure you are in the best possible place for this new normal that we are now increasingly in, as was said last week. And the pit stop analogy from Professor Scott of LBS I really like, because what it's kind of saying is that you need to think not just about the car, but also the driver, the leadership team, if you like, and the pit stop crew, the people who are actually doing the work, because unless those three have got their act together, and unless there's also great understanding of the track condition and the weather forecast, I could continue the analogy forever. It'll fall over at some point, but you get where I'm coming from. In other words, it's a pretty good way to think about it. So what's quite good, though, is to think about what are some strategies for retuning your firm. And for those that have been on the show before, I think you'll have seen them, but I think they're really worth emphasizing because they do pick up themes that we will, I know, cover as we go through today. So firstly, think big. As Lewis Carroll said memorably, believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. So don't be bold. Remember about relationships, and you are the power of your relationships, but reciprocity is absolutely fundamental. Otherwise, you're just ending up with an address book that isn't much use to anyone. Think small. Be focused. Think on the angles that will resonate with your key audiences. That could be clients, it could be your own people, whichever. Think about campaigns. Think about not just one-offs, but actually how do you actually take your people and your clients and your audience, how do you turn them into a community? Drop the convention. Think about new ideas. Think about new services. There are the naysayers have gone into their caves at the moment. So as one managing partner said to me, great, I can actually get on with all the things I really wanted to do. Fantastic. Speed is of the essence, picking up that same theme. So going back to lean start, articulate and market test your assumptions. Be clear about what assumptions you're making in your plans. And if they prove invalid, and some will, amend them and then pivot in a new direction. And lastly, be entrepreneurial. Keep listening and innovating. And the key word in that sentence is listening. I think we'll all agree on that. So, sorry, my mouse is very excited today. So I thank you very much to Alina Kudska of Globsec and Bratislava for that. That's really great insight. So today's panel, who's we got on? Well, firstly, I welcome Jodie Heath, who's the membership manager for the Consultancy Procurement Council. And you'll be hearing quite a lot about procurement today. It may not be a topic that you actually have spent much time on. Most managing partners, when I talk to them about how much time they spend managing suppliers, the answer is not very much. But anyway, let's understand about this, because let's face it, everybody is both a client and a supplier. You have suppliers to you as an organization. Zoe Bailey is the Chief Strategy Officer of accountancy firm BDO, and she's been talking a bit about how they've been approaching strategy and making it something that wasn't just locked in the CEO's office, but actually really resonated all the way down the organization. Francesca, who I think most of you will be familiar with now, having been on the call for, I think, every week, and she's always brings a ray of sunshine, which is fantastic, to our conversations. And then Derek Klyhn, who is a consultant, spent many years at EY, and interestingly was a founding, responsible for the EY Entrepreneur of the Year global competition for a number of years. So got to know a lot about entrepreneurs, and that's something that I guess theme that we're going to be picking up today. And of course, yours truly, who's the founder, chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum. Government sent apologies today. She's on holiday, but I think we'll let Lucy off because that's fine. So what did we do last week? Let me just quickly run through some of the findings from last week's tracker. This is rather busy, but the key point here is the color codes. That purple is back in February, in other words, before the pandemic even started, and then the other dates you can see. And I think what's interesting is that actually it hasn't changed much. Despite the pandemic, despite this being three times in lockdown, fundamentally the same 3 or 4 items about technology, people skills, clear purpose and strategy, and operation efficiency were as key back in February and last year, because we've tracked this for a number of years, as they still are today. So despite what everybody says in terms of business priorities, they actually haven't changed much. And that isn't something that necessarily people are always aware of. I quite like these kind of scissor tweezers. They're quite fun. So what's happening here? Well, the level of activity, you've got this huge shift from back in February, and you can see that the blue expansion 80%. it's now, well, it's sort of coming back together, but it's still got a bit of a gap in terms of the current situation, 20 odd points. When it comes to new work, though, same scissor effect, but actually those two are really quite close now. But here's the big one, headcount. That one is definitely still looking really quite a long way apart, and that kind of led to some coverage we had of this poll last week, where Legal Week actually wrote a piece saying half of firms expect to cut staff headcount this year. Poll finds expectations of revenue declines, and that is here what that's all about. So here is the, let's go back to that for a sec, sorry. So expectations of revenue declines unless office-based requirements also emerged in the figures. So let's look at those two. So in terms of revenue declines, there's two ways of looking at this. You can either say at a positive side, blue, which is the last week, 11% in the 30% plus compared with north of 50 back in April. And that's a big positive, and equally none has grown from 7 to 16. Or you could say, actually, there's still a bulk of firms in the around about the 20% mark who see income dipping by that amount over the next year. So you can kind of read into this whatever you like, quite frankly, but it's interesting stuff. As you know, this goes to government, who find it really useful. Office space, again, there isn't really much change, to be honest, from April, May, June, July. It hasn't fundamentally altered. Not many people wanting more space. That's, I guess, the main point I'd make. And a couple more here, just really talking about people, because, you know, stats take you so far, but there's the whole issue of trade-off between to what extent are people going to be working from home by the end of October. And this is all kind of set out here. It hasn't fundamentally shifted between June and July over the last month. No one is you know, no offices are going to have everybody back. That's pretty obvious. But everyone working from home, again, is only about 20%. So the offices are going to be open and they'll be there. And you're seeing that happening at the moment. But then the other question that goes with it, which is kind of around the general mood amongst people over returning to the office. Okay, the very apprehensive, which is the red, has dropped back a bit into July, but you know, still talking about 70% of people being apprehensive and only 6% being relaxed. And so I think, you know, there's a risk there that, you know, in the urge to open up the office, that we may end up with causing unnecessary stress amongst some of our people. There's some other bits in the in the findings as well. I've not given you all the charts, but it's a really interesting snapshot of what's going on. And thank you for, I know a number of you on the call today will have completed it last week. So what are we going to do this week? Well, firstly, just to remind ourselves, why do we bother? It's not just for us, it's actually UK government find it really, really valuable too, which is great. And actually, the other thing I was going to say, also talk about UK government, is that this is yesterday's press release, but there's a new scheme called the Recovery Advice for Business Scheme, which has been hosted by Enterprise Nation. And you can find this on the government website. But basically what's happening is that business experts, supported by professional trade bodies, that includes us, have rallied behind, and we're encouraging people to give 6 months of help give help to entrepreneurs over 6 months. Now, we'll talk a bit later about the mismatch, if any, between frontline accountants and entrepreneurs, but let's leave that one for Derek when he comes in with his expertise. So that's a little bit of knowledge. I say government wasn't here today, so I thought I'd just do a little bit of publicity for them. So now let's work on to today's poll. And as you may have identified from when you read through my notes, today's poll, we're looking at procurement. So let's have a look. Let's see what we've got here. And Jodie is obviously watching with great interest, given her expertise in this area. So how senior is the person with primary responsibility for procurement at your firm? Firm-wide leader stands out the strongest, and only 3% have nobody responsible. So that's a good start. In terms of policies, the policy is a sort of a general policy relating to all categories of spend, rather than specific provisions relating to specific areas, but those are the two major ones. In terms of which statements are true, again, looking down them, the one that stands out is highest is the spend over a predetermined limit has to be approved by senior management. Or only 8% are only 8% of firms where none of those are true, which is good. But if I look down the average, there's only 2 or 3 that are actually more than 50%, and a fair number in the 20s and 30% only being true. So there's probably some issues there. In terms of barriers, again, the one that is probably the highest is the lack of expert procurement resource, which again, I think Jodie would have views on. And only 24% say that none of these barriers apply at their firm. So 3/4 of people are saying that at least one of these barriers is there, and the one that's got the highest is the lack of procurement resource, followed by obviously changing business priorities. So that's some of the barriers. In terms of procurement decisions based on historic spend data and tighter budgets, again, 2/3 saying high quality, 1/3 saying poor quality, and nobody kept in the dark, so that's good. Which are the following resources? Rapid tender seems to be the one that is given 47%, but again, none of these are more than half. So these were multiple choice. So some people are 32% don't use any of them, which again, you may have views on, Jodie, in terms of none of those. I'm not sure what other approaches exist, but maybe you would know as an expert. During the last year, what percentage of your approach did you collect structured feedback? 1/3, none at all. 26 below 10, only 8% above 50% of purchases. That's not the same as spend, it's the number of purchases. Background checks, yes, 45% say yes. Required standards, and we do our own if we're not sure that they are suppliers are sufficient. 34% we do standards, 21% none, no background checks. Do they have supplier panels? Yes, but half of them don't. 55% have no panels and no immediate plan to establish any. So possibly a little bit in the dark there, and only 13% where 50% or more of the spenders was the panel. And whether they have an established approach to supplier relationships, 61% is occasionally informal, but 21% say there's no management relationship at all. So hopefully Jodie's had a chance to take a few notes, because we're going to be closing it down and hiding it. Before I quickly share, I'll just say that what we've done is we've taken those same questions and we have converted it into a procurement maturity diagnostic, which Jodie has completed, but she said that I'm not going to let you know what her score was, and so you may well find that interesting. It's takes about 2-3 minutes, and then you can actually go and see what your actual score was as an organisation. So it's something that the forum will make available. So I'll stop sharing now, and I will hand over to Jodie, and welcome to you as our first presenter. Over to you, Jodie.
Hi everyone. So yeah, that was really interesting. I've spent many years in procurement for different organisations. I think, as Richard mentioned earlier, for me, moving to AstraZeneca in a procurement role really kind of highlighted the importance of procurement and how saving money and adding value to the supply chain really helps. So moving to AstraZeneca, it was very much the case that every pound saved was an extra pound to invest in R&D. That was an extra pound to plug into R&D to try and find life-enhancing and life-saving medicines. And for me, that was a real motivator and actually made you want to go out and, and deliver cost savings and also value. So I suppose the question is, why should you get serious about procurement? Why should procurement be ingrained within your organisation? And I think there are numerous reasons. So first of all, it is a discipline and it is an expertise. Not everybody can be a buyer. For me, having that role in procurement and having some of those difficult conversations allowed my senior stakeholders within organisations to maintain a very good relationship with suppliers and really look at delivery, while procurement can focus on managing cost, KPIs, performance, feedback, all that kind of good stuff. I think at the moment with COVID-19, it's really important that as an organisation, you ensure that your supply chain is secure. The world won't be the same place after COVID-19, and how that will impact upon our supply chain and our markets, we don't know as yet. So it's really important to have those conversations and make sure that your supply chain is secure. And also it's about managing cost. Procurement is about delivering best value, but it is also about managing cost. And I think during COVID-19, we're certainly hearing from some of our members that it is about sharing the pain. So it is also about reaching out to those key suppliers. And I think it's a reasonable ask to expect your suppliers to actually look at their costs and look at their delivery. I think in normal times, it is about maximising profitability. It's not just about income generated within an organisation. It's also about cost off the bottom line. So what is procurement, and what can you expect a good strategic procurement department within your organisation to deliver? So as I said, it is about driving the best value from the supply chain. It shouldn't just be cost focused or even value focused. It's about delivering the best value. So I've worked in numerous different categories across procurement. And when I look at my time in research and development, it really isn't cost driven at all. It's about getting a drug to market quicker than your competitor. That is how you get a competitive advantage, and that's how you get a patent. So actually talking cost to a set of stakeholders that are senior scientists and are all about delivering speed to market is never going to get you where you want to get to. It's about delivering best value. And that could be quality, it could be ticking some compliance boxes, reducing risk, for example, but it's also could be about speed to market, speed to delivery. So it's about figuring out what that value add is for your business, and actually how procurement can help to manage suppliers more strategically and actually deliver that value to you. So there are a couple of pitfalls, I suppose, that you should probably avoid when dealing with procurement. So I think one of them is implementing a procurement transactional only team. And I think it was kind of mentioned within the survey that there was a lack of expert procurement delivery, and that was one of the barriers. I think if you implement a procurement transactional only team where it is about managing purchase orders and invoices, you're never going to get that value. It needs to be strategic in nature to drive and to drive your suppliers. So I think something else that kind of came out within that was a lack of supplier relationship management. And that for me is key. I've worked in different organisations that have been very transactional and commodity based to moving over to very much strategic procurement. And that is really where you add value. That's where you get a real deep understanding of your suppliers, about how to be a good client from your perspective as well, so that suppliers want to do business with you and it's easy to do business with you. But also making sure that, you know, the procurement team are effective and efficient in meeting your needs as an organisation. One of the other pitfalls and areas where procurement really falls down is when stakeholders don't fully support and sponsor procurement. There's nothing worse as a procurement professional than sitting in a negotiation and actually the deal's already been done, or a cost's already been agreed, or a document's already been signed. Procurement has to be seen as being key to that decision and actually really involved from very, very early on within any tender process or any contract negotiation. If it's not, then believe me, suppliers will find ways of avoiding procurement at all costs, which a lot of them tend to do, and kind of skirt around and go to more senior levels. So it has to very much be a relationship internally. And I've spent many years actually building internal relationships with stakeholders is just as important as building external relationships with suppliers. It really has to be everybody sat at the same table. And a final point for me is don't underestimate the reputational risk of poorly selected and managed suppliers. We've all heard headlines out there regarding suppliers and reputational risk. And a supplier that you are using in the public domain, you know, their reputational risk does reflect on you. And I think procurement can really help to make sure that from a compliance perspective, your suppliers that are chosen for the right reasons, and actually that they represent the ethics of your organisation. And that's something that we're doing a lot of work on at the moment within the CPC, is to look at how diversity and inclusion is streamlined down our supply chain, not just within the organisation itself. If that's okay, Richard?
Thanks very much, Jodie. That was great, really interesting. And most people I know just kind of see the procurement as being the people who get in the way, the other side. But actually what I think increasingly is that we need to understand that we can deploy this expertise in our own organizations. And the word strategy came up a lot, didn't it, Zoe? So please talk us through a bit about BDO strategy, but also, where do you feel that possibly procurement fits in the mix from your strategic planning perspective?
Yeah, it was really interesting, Jodie, to hear about procurement strategy and the fact that you talked about when you have a clear strategy, that's when it really, really works. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about three things today. So I'm going to cover the importance of actually having a responsive strategic framework, the benefits of being purpose-led, and the opportunities which we find ourselves in at the moment. A change environment really does provide us. So moving on to the first point, and the importance of a responsive strategic framework. So at BDO, our strategic framework has really anchored our decision making. We brought our strategic framework into the business 4 years ago when Paul Eagland, our managing partner, took head of the helm, and it has achieved a lot of consistency, understanding, belonging, and focus for the entire firm. Our strategic framework is made up of 4 components: our purpose, our vision, our values, and our strategy. And when I talk to people in the business, I use a boat analogy to try to bring that to life, because sometimes strategy can be quite challenging in terms of understanding what it means in respect to the whole firm, but also what it really means at an individual level. And this boat analogy is very much in respect of our purpose. That's why you get in the boat in the first place. Our vision is very much, where is it we want to get to? What is that destination? What does great look like? Values is really about how we're going to behave with each other on that journey, so it's as enjoyable as it can be. And our strategy is the destination points that we're going to take, the decisions we're going to make on that journey to get to that destination. But whilst providing structure, I think it's really important that your strategy in particular is flexible enough to respond to the external and the internal environment. What we're going through at the moment, these unknowns. And we're finding that at BDO, our strategy is robust enough in that we have an acronym to describe our strategy. It's called BUILD. And those 5 pillars have not changed just because of C19, but absolutely the priorities within that strategy we have had to adapt. So we have that relentless eye now on the short term, whilst also keeping many eyes on the future. Now, you heard me talk in terms of our strategic framework, that we start with our purpose. So that takes me on to the second point, and that's the benefits of being purpose-led. And I strongly believe at the moment that the world is really watching how businesses are behaving during these times, the decisions we're making, and how we're responding, how we're treating our suppliers, our people, our clients. And we really should want to be judged on our purpose. That there's a great quote by McKinsey, and I used this at a recent core purpose workshop that I ran with our champions. And it says, at a time of great uncertainty, gut check your decisions against your values as a leader and as an organization. Do your choices align with your identity? Everything you do now will be analyzed after the dust settles. Will your actions' identity be as consistent? And that really makes you ponder and think about what it is that's grounding your decisions now and in the future. So our purpose at BDO is helping you succeed. We articulated this to the business 5 years ago. When I say articulated it, because it was absolutely prevalent for many years before this, our purpose is enduring. And it speaks really at the heart of why we do what we do. It was a big discovery exercise. It was a 12-month engagement process. It involved all of our partners and most of our people across the business, and has really resonated and has become additional glue in respect of that strategic framework. So we continue to meet with all of our business leaders on a regular basis across the firm to share central updates around our entire strategic framework, but very importantly also our core purpose. And our purpose continues to keep us focused. I would say now equally, if not even more important during these current times. And the narrative that we have used to navigate recent months is anchored in our purpose. So we very much internally talk about our focus on protecting the business and our people. So that is very linked with helping you succeed. And our focus on our people ensures that the decisions we make now are also taken in the firm with that long-term lens in place. And in respect to the long term, we also, as Richard was saying earlier about thinking big and thinking small, we need to think about the environment which we find ourselves in. And we are in a change environment. And that brings opportunities. So that's the third point I want to talk about today is the opportunities of a change environment. So we have used a framework called Rethink. It talks about how we react in the immediate term, the resilience we want to build in the more medium term, and longer term, how we're going to realise our ambitions as a business. We're using this internally, but we're also using it to help our clients navigate these interesting times as well. So again, this framework is anchored by our build strategy. That keeps us consistent across the business. And then we look at what it is that it is crucial in respect of the immediate, how we're going to work with our people, what that new way of working is going to look like. In respect to the medium, some of those financial implications that are going to feed through, particularly if we enter a deep recession, what the new normal might be and what the opportunities will be from that. And then longer term, therefore, the strategic considerations that will be vital to our continued success. And we've seen a change at pace really not experienced before, well, certainly not in my 18 years at BDO. And I do like the quote, crisis is the mother of all innovation. And actually, this is a fantastic opportunity. Crisis provides a welcoming, I term coin, welcoming environment for change. And what we're finding in respect to some of the change that we've brought in the last few months is that people are far more forgiving. And when there is a crisis, when there's a call to arms, people are much more receptive. They understand the need for change, that in it together, and they don't expect it to be perfect. So this very much has led for us to the rise of the agile approach. We were doing agile projects before, but very much a rise of that. But I have already started to observe that window is very small and it's already closing. We have in our member firm network, our Dutch firm and our Australia firm, and I connect with them regularly. They returned to their offices fairly recently, and already people are displaying previous habits. So although it takes a short period of time to create new habits, it can be even quicker to go back to those old established habits that we've had in place for decades. So to transform and optimize business processes, behaviors, new ways of working, we really need to work hard at maintaining what it is that we want to achieve and what we might have identified during this change period in the last few months that have optimized the way in which we do business. So we really need to identify those and ring fence them. And when sitting back and thinking about it and talking to the business around change, I very much think that in actual fact, it's probably harder to go back to where we were previously than to move forward to where we want to be. So in conclusion, number one, having a strategy provides direction, clear communication and ambition. Number two, having it anchored by a purpose makes it even more powerful. And finally, number three, strategic priorities need to adapt during times of change to make the most of the change environment, to identify what is optimal for your business, and then we all need to work hard to make that stick. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Zoe. It's interesting. We did a poll way back. Francesca may remember this one. And we asked the question, do you think we're going to go back to the old normal? And I think 0% of people said that they thought we'd go back to the old normal. Now, what is interesting, what you were saying about Australia, and I think it was Holland, how those old habits are now looking like they are beginning to resurface. And Francesca, again, you have this global perspective. What are your thoughts today on what you've heard to date?
Well, and thank you. And it's really good to listen to Jodie and Zoe there. I've just got a couple of thoughts to draw some threads together, because we've had this really good insight into the supply chain economics and into how you use strategy to keep you anchored and keep yourself safe. What are clients saying? What's the mid-market saying, which of course is the engine house of economies right around the world? What are you hearing there? Well, we do a survey. It's called the Global Business Pulse, and not a surprise to see the latest version of that index shows that most businesses are really, really concerned about where they're at. The index, which is based over about 10 years worth of data, but has a quarterly review, that shows that most people in the mid-market who were surveyed in this particular Global Business Pulse are pretty pessimistic about where they're currently at. It's gone negative for the first time since the financial crisis. And I don't think that's a huge surprise. If you imagine that a business that's doing incredibly well, sort of Olympian style well, they would be plus 100. If they're on the abyss and about to tip over into disaster, they'd be minus 100. And if you look at it globally, so it's over about 29 countries, the global figure is -9 at the moment, which is actually not great, obviously, but surprisingly not as awful as you might have expected. And so what are we getting there? What are we actually hearing from those businesses? There's sort of a touch there of mid-market resilience. It's still holding in. Clearly, there's a sort of pragmatism about some of the worst things may still be to come. There's something intriguing there about the fact that the mid-market still believes that there's opportunity, there's some resilience sitting there in the market. And a third of the businesses are still saying that they think their revenues are going to end up roughly where they hoped they were going to be, in spite of everything, which says something around their belief that demand will come back, something about how they're managing their supply chains and their own finances, and also something about their businesses that they think will have some element of resilience to ride through some of the difficulties at the moment. And obviously, we'll see if that proves to be true. But if you want more information on that, just pop on my LinkedIn account and you can see the detail. But it's intriguing to see that despite what you'd expect to be the worst trading conditions that most of us have ever experienced, that there are hints that the mid-market, which really matters in any part of the world, is holding up a little bit better than you might have thought. And some of that is obviously down to some government incentives, some long-term planning, but actually going back to the strategic point, they had strategies in place that have helped them in these sorts of times, and how important that framework is. The second thing was really probably that going back to that internal, our own businesses. I think most of us have probably been working flat out for 5 to 6 months, and many people have been both looking after their families, looking after their elderly relatives, and running their businesses all from their living room or their kitchen. And there was a really intriguing bunch of articles in the last week that really resonated with me. Something called war room fatigue. You know, we sort of had enough. We're kind of over this now. Can we do something else? I was sort of contemplating, it feels quite exhausting being on lots of Zoom calls and on lots of Teams or whatever your communication methodology of choice is. And Microsoft popped out a survey this week, which I loved, because it said everything you believe is true. Your brain, your mental stress when you're on calls it's much more tiring to be engaging when you're on a call than when you're in a room. If you're just sitting there back and listening, not too bad. But if you're actually trying to drive things, move things forward, win work, meet new clients, develop things for your clients, it's much more tiring. And after 30 to 40 minutes, your brain's going, I've had enough. So again, another interesting element, telling you what I think we already knew, that it is mentally quite exhausting to do this. So I went back to something that I looked at, God, years ago. I mean, it must have been back in the 90s this came out. Obviously, it was Harvard Business Review. Who else would come up with such an awesome program? But they did something around adaptive change. It's not around the tactical change that you do and all the technical changes that you do in the moment, but around how do you adapt to a new environment. And I think it touches on quite a few of the things you were mentioning, Zoe, as well. And they had a lovely phrase, and it just came back to me the other day, which is about putting yourself on the balcony. The logic being that as your leaders in your firms, you're putting yourself in a place where you're actually taking yourself out of the fray for a few minutes, a few hours, and you're looking out and going, what am I really seeing here? What's really going on? And it speaks to the points Jodie's making around procurement. It speaks to the points around how do you really make sure that you take yourself a little bit away for a moment and have a balcony view and not get too caught up in the weeds to enable you to work out what that new normal really needs to look like. So a lovely piece of work from Harvard, but a really important reminder that sometimes you do need to slightly distance to get that better vision for the future. Back to you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks for that, Francesca. There's another, I always think, lovely saying, which is say that the role of the leader is to create the stage on which others perform. Because only in not performing do you have that ability to take that detached perspective, because you can see things. And if it's always going to be you who leads everything, then a bit like me remembering to occasionally not flick the right button or something when I'm running a Zoom call. It's the usual, because your focus is, as you say, it's absolutely on the client and how you should do it. Oh, I've forgotten about, oh, we're not recording. Whoops, hasn't happened yet. But so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. Derek, that was, I'll just bring you in if I may, but picking up Francesca's point around the mid-market and the mid-market survey and the -9 and the engine room, I think you called it, of the world economy. At the same time, there is another whole world, which let's call it, say, the world of the entrepreneur, some of whom grow to mid-market or even larger firms, many of whom are, for lifestyle reasons, are happy not to grow that large. And you and your role as the coordinator or leader of the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award, a lot of accountancy onto there, haven't we? I just thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and to what extent, and again, this may be picking up in terms of that government scheme, which I mentioned earlier, Enterprise Nation, which is all about small businesses. To what extent are we as advisors working with mid and particularly larger firms, if we're in, say, the Big Four or Magic Circle, to what extent can we really help? What do we bring? Anyway, I'd welcome your thoughts on that, Derek.
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, first of all, delighted to join the panel today. I'm a founding member of PSFI, so we're a group that works with law firms, accounting firms, various other professional services firms. We were set up at Cambridge about 10 years ago, Cambridge University. But prior to that, a lot of my work, as Richard has said, was spent working with entrepreneurs, first as an auditor and an accountant, and then later on developing the strategy for both at EY and then subsequently at Mazar for the owner-managed marketplace, the entrepreneurial marketplace, developing business development tools as well. And whilst at EY, launching Entrepreneur of the Year in the UK and then globally. And Entrepreneur of the Year remains one of the most successful integrated marketing and business development initiatives the firm has. And in the first year alone, which was many, many years ago, it was generating millions of pounds of revenue each year. So it looked like a marketing initiative. In fact, it was business development. And that was because the connections we could make with the entrepreneurs. So I'm going to start off by talking about what do clients want in general from their advisors, and then perhaps just look at what entrepreneurs want and then put it into the context of the pandemic situation that we're facing at the moment. And to do that, I'm going to share some insights from evidence drawn from two sources. One source are the clients themselves, and the other ones are the rainmakers, the people within the firms who are exemplars in terms of going out and creating the relationships and developing new clients. In the case of the clients, we've talked to a lot of clients over the years, and in particular, we've observed probably about 3,000 conversations between partners and clients, and then heard the client's feedback. And in a way, over 10 years, the stories still remain the same. The needs of the entrepreneur, the needs of the client in general, seems to remain pretty much consistent. And it seems to be that we can't quite, as advisors, quite latch on to the things that the rainmakers do. So in terms of the rainmakers, we've I'm going to draw on evidence which has come from over 50 interviews with rainmakers or key account partners in different firms over the years. So fascinating to see what they do that make them stand out in their performance compared to their other partners who are also obviously very good. So what is it that clients look for? What is it that rainmakers do that actually creates that connection? And it's pretty simple, I'm afraid. It is just basically, clients want you to understand them. It's just basically understand me. It's simple, but it's also quite challenging sometimes for advisors to get into that space to actually understand them. Partly because as advisors, we build up our knowledge around the professional body of knowledge. We are experts. We tend to focus on that. We always like to have an answer to every question. Finding out about the client's business actually involves revealing yourself a bit more. It involves asking questions. It involves not knowing the answers to those questions that you've posed. So it can feel a bit exposed, but it's extremely rewarding, both for us as advisors and also the clients. But what does it mean? What do I mean by understanding me as a client? There's a number of layers to this. I mean, first of all, fundamentally, they want their advisors to understand their business. So how does it work? How does it make money? And all too often, if we're a lawyer, or an accountant even, or a tax advisor, you can sometimes miss that because we're so focused on the matter in hand, the transaction. We are transactional relationships. We are sharing our knowledge in terms of our technical expertise, but we're not looking at it from the client's perspective. Besides understanding their business, what they're also looking for is understand the context in which my business operates. And that's understanding the sector or the industry in which we operate. We've seen many firms, both initially in the accounting marketplace, but now in the legal marketplace, really focusing on sectors in order to be able to deliver that. But really, the thing that they're really looking for is understand my objectives, understand my strategy effectively. What do I want to achieve? Because you are there to help me achieve that strategy. And we shouldn't be an expert for hire. We need to engage with the clients to actually understand what they want, to understand where they are, where they want to get to, what's going to stop them, what they aspire to. So really understanding their objectives is really what they're looking for. Some clients, in fact many clients, also want you as an advisor to understand them personally. Now that may just be the way that I work, a bit more by background, but often for many of them it's also understand my agenda. What do I want to achieve as an individual, as an executive, or as an owner manager in the business? So it's as simple as that. I want you to do all those things. That applies across all types of businesses, but in particular for mid-market businesses, for entrepreneurial businesses, they really, really do respond well if you get to understand and really show an interest in their business. We had one sales director when we were doing Entrepreneur of the Year. He said, I went out to one client and we had a list of questions that you need to ask just to get the information in order to assess the entrepreneur for the award program. And he said, I went out there, had this list of questions. I only asked 2 questions, and 2.5 hours later, we were still talking because the client just was so grateful to be able to talk about his and her business. And he said, subsequently, when he went out to different events, the entrepreneur would always say, come across, meet Mike, because Mike knows more about our business than our auditor does, which is quite sort of telling. So just understanding that, entrepreneurs really want that. So how do you go about that? It is pretty simple, but it's basically sometimes difficult to do. It's ask good questions. Ask questions about them, not just to fill your knowledge buckets, but really to understand them. Ask questions, but then listen. Listening is very something which we don't do enough of. Build upon the questions and the answers that you hear. Replay to demonstrate your knowledge, add value if at all. So ask questions and listen and build and replay. Also, understand their business. Sometimes it's useful to have a few mental models or frameworks to understand the business. So if you can get some of those, then it just makes the conversation easier. And the important thing is your mindset as well. You really need to go in and talk to your clients with curiosity to know what makes them tick, what makes it work. Be very client orientated, have a broad view of the business, not just focusing on your particular area, and look at long-term relationships. And why do they want all those things? Well, they want those things because things they want from their advisors, they want their advisors to be aligned to them. We were talking earlier, Richard was saying they want them to walk in their shoes. You can only walk in their shoes if you understand them, you understand their business and their objectives and their agenda. They want you to be commercial, and they also want you to add value beyond the matter that you're delivering. They expect you to deliver superb value in terms of the matter you're delivering. But what other things can you deliver? And you can only deliver those if you understand their agenda and objectives. So where are we now in the pandemic? These things are always there, always important, but they're so much more important because we've heard strategies are changing, our clients are changing, their needs are changing, and they're also, there's lots of unknowns out there. We may feel as advisors that we need to go out there and have an answer. In fact, we just need to connect with them. We just need to talk to them. That's what they're looking for. I'm just going to finish off with a few quotes from a few clients that we've talked to in the last few weeks about the pandemic. One of them says, I'm getting flooded with COVID-19 updates, but only 2 partners have actually called me. That's quite telling. Another one said, a lot of emails, but no personal involvement or recall. And the final one, this was actually from a GC within the FTSE 100 company, came back and said, I've been amazed at the lack of proactivity of most law firms. Bombarding us with COVID email updates seems to be the norm, but with only 1 or 2 notable exceptions, very little picking up the phone and asking how they can help or what our problems are. So I think it just accentuates it in this time of COVID-19 that we really need to reach out to our clients to understand their business. And that's what the rainmakers, that's what the people who are good at account management do. And it's amazing the number of partners when we put them in front of clients of course say, you could have asked a bit more about that. You know, that's what I really wanted you to find out a bit more. So with that, Richard, I'll hand back to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Derek. That was really interesting and kind of put a few strands together. We've got a few minutes left now for a quick panel catch up. I mean, really just think, perhaps starting off with Zoe. I mean, when you've got this situation where partners, and using some of Derek's examples, aren't possibly reaching out. I mean, and whatever it may say in the strategy, how do you actually go about making sure that people do actually think client rather than send yet another email? Is there any sort of tips and tricks you've come up with there?
Well, I talked earlier about our rethink model, and I think that has really been changing the way in which we are going to market and we are talking to our clients, trying to be more demand-led rather than we have these services and this is what we sell. So absolutely what Derek was saying, really listening to your clients and understanding what it is that they need, and therefore connecting them with the right people that can help them, but also we may not be the best people to help them, and recognizing that and making those connections as well. So I think, yeah, I think that approach is definitely evolving, and our rethink focus is really helping actually.
Excellent. There's also a couple of questions. I don't know if you're looking at those, Zoe, so I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about those. And Francesca, do you have any kind of thoughts on some of Derek's let's go back to basics and remember to engage with our clients messages?
Isn't it fascinating? You know, I mean, I know none of this is rocket science, but isn't it intriguing that we still don't do this as a matter of consistency? And I know I just the same, I've been peppered with, you know, brochures, graphs, fascinating stuff, but how many people are actually thinking about the humanity behind that, and how many people are taking that effort to reach out in a different way, in a thoughtful way? And I think it takes you back to that reality that in professional service firms, it is about humanity. It's about people. It's a people business, working with people to deal with people issues. And you've got to keep that forefront of mind. And then even though we spend a lot of time talking about great tech and amazing ways to drive ourselves forward using AI, fundamentally, if you miss the humanity step in that, that's where people feel that their advisor isn't delivering what they need. So a really good reminder.
And picking up relationships, Jodie, again, I know you stress quite strongly that when you are in a procurement role, if you don't have good supplier relationships, then life gets much tougher. I mean, from your perspective, are there any angles that you've seen around the basics here that we've been talking about that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Procurement is all about relationships with internal stakeholders, very much as it is with relationships with your supply chain. And I think when things take a turn for the worse and things become difficult, such as COVID, you know, that there is a big a rush to go and actually engage with your suppliers, and there certainly should be a little bit more. It's all about building those relationships and adding that additional value. And with the best will in the world, if you need somebody both internally or externally to pull out all the stops and go that extra mile, they're only going to do that for those that they have the key relationships with. So in times of crisis, I think it really is even more about relationships rather than, you know, a contract, for example. And I think it's ever more important that we, you know, harness those relationships and nurture them and make sure that we are picking up the phone and speaking to our suppliers and also as much as our customers.
Derek, just picking up your point again, because we've all kind of honed in on that one, which is great. But I mean, can you develop a relationship in an hour? I mean, what's the sort of, is there any sort of metric when you were doing your EY program about, okay, expect to spend so much time with this entrepreneur before you can feel you really get into their shoes, going back to the analogy? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is partly you've got to ask questions, but you've also got to be prepared to listen. As advisors, we like to talk a lot. We don't like pauses. We don't like gaps. We often ask a question. If there isn't an answer, we start answering it ourselves. And it's really difficult sometimes to get partners just to step back and just let the silence rest there to get someone back. It's responding to the clients, hearing what they're saying and building upon it. So again, I've seen partners who go out, will ask a great question and they tick the question off in their mind and they move on to the next question instead of saying, well, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about this? Can you do that? In an hour, it's difficult. In an hour, when we run sort of programs where we've got partners in front of clients, you can get a connection and the idea is to get the next meeting. But I think really this is all about long-term relationships as well. There's a number of touch points. An Entrepreneur of the Year worked because there were a number of touch points built into the program as a revenue program. And it's the same thing in terms of your relationships with people. You have to go back and meet them lots and lots of times and build on that knowledge, and your understanding of their objectives increases. And if you're replaying that to them and asking the right questions, that's also going up. So separate research I've done just shows over a course of acquiring a client, how some things wax and wane, but things like trust and understanding their objective just increases as you go through until they make that final decision. So really it is about being consistent and going back, having lots of touch points, but also just being that curiosity, finding out about them and their objectives.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back, I think, now perhaps to Zoe. You've had a chance, there's a couple of questions. What does BUILD stand for? And also, is innovation invention, or is it about adding to what's already there? Remolding was the term. And so if you'd like to just pick up those two, and then I think we're going to have to get to the end, as they say, sadly.
Absolutely. So yes, our build strategy is broken down into 5 components. So B stands for brand. And as I was mentioning earlier, I think that is so crucial at the moment, because reputation and the reputation of your business is absolutely under scrutiny at the moment. So the societal lens is firmly looking in businesses' direction. So our brand is really important. We then, the U in BUILD stands for Unifying Culture. Our people, their well-being, ensuring that they can be themselves, reach their potential, how we help society succeed. I stands for international. We are a member firm network, so actually having that connectivity across that international network is crucial, but recognizing that our clients have global connections and ambitions. So a firm lens on I. Leading markets. This is very much about us leading in our chosen markets. We have many clients from owner-managed businesses, the mid-market, and the FTSE 350, but really leading in the markets and working with the clients that we want to work with. And then D for digital mindset, which leads into that innovation question quite nicely. In respect of when we talk about digital mindset, it's really very much that mindset piece. And when thinking about innovation, of course, there's incremental change and there's transformational change. And those incremental changes, having that mindset where you're more adaptable to change and can think differently and take on new ways of working, I think is really crucial for a business, and particularly at the moment.
Well, that's great. Gosh, we're at 10 o'clock. How time flies when you're enjoying yourself. But can I thank my panel today for their great insights around procurement, from Jodie, from Zoe, about strategy and how you take strategy from a plan that sits in a room to something that really engages people. I think the build breakdown was really interesting. Francesca, thank you for your insights, particularly the mid-market survey, and let's hope that dial moves back to positive territory soon, because at the end of the day, if our clients are struggling, then we as a sector struggle because we are very much instructed by them. And Derek, thank you for your great research and insights around entrepreneurs. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really good that we are going to be encouraging people to help through the Enterprise Nation route, but let's not pretend that in 1 hour we're going to be able to change their lives either, because that came through quite strongly, I think, today. But I think it's really important that we reach out. As I mentioned, procurement maturity diagnostic, you've got the slide there. This is something that we'll be letting you know. I'm going to be now sitting down and converting all those entries into actual diagnostic entries, and then I'll let you know what the average was for today's group, and then we might let you know what Jodie came up with, but hey, maybe not, who knows. So thank you for that. For those of you who haven't been on the call, we've rejugged the management library a little bit. It now has its own column for retuning your firm, and we've also brought all the webinar polls in as a separate column as well, so you don't have to go anywhere else for those. So it's all in there. And obviously for the members, then all, as you can see along the top, all the various member meetings which take place every week, all those videos are in there for the members as well, because some of the things we do obviously are member only, as you'd expect. Hope you found today valuable. Please encourage your peers to sign up, and it's the usual link. And obviously consider supporting our work, because, as you know, we all have a bill too. And I think Claire will probably be in touch, particularly around the procurement agenda shortly in the context of our new marketplace. So that's really enough from me. I'd like to thank the panel for their hard work. We've got another really interesting panel lined up next week, focused slightly more on employer brand and marketing. So we'll be looking at another whole bunch of ways in which you might want to retune your firm. On which happy note, I wish you all a wonderful day and have a great weekend when you get there. Bye for now.